Welcome, everybody, to the latest edition of the Bullpen with Adam the Bull, brought to you by Bet Rivers. Lot to get to on the podcast today. Coming up later, we'll talk with former big league GM, now the host of on MLB Network Radio, and it's Jim Duquette. And Jim does a great job. He and Mike Farron do a show together on MLB Radio, and so he will join me to talk, preview the Guardians season. Guardians will open the season next Thursday, the 28th, in Oakland. They'll start the season on a 6-game road trip, Oakland and Seattle. Amongst the questions we'll get to, of course, why the Guardians sent down two of their best-performing prospects in Kyle Manzardo and Chase DeLauder. Well, we know why, but we'll get his take on it from a former GM perspective. So Power Alley, the host of Power Alley and former GM will join us later. But we're going to begin with some Browns news. The Browns have signed another free agent today, plus yesterday they extended Jerry Jeudy. We'll get to that and what the free agent signing today may say about a current Browns superstar. That's all coming up on today's edition of the Bullpen with Adam the Bull, brought to you by Bet Rivers.
You're watching Adam the Bull on the Bet Rivers Network.
All right, so let's get into it. The Browns today have reportedly, this is according to Adam Schefter, who broke the news, signing another running back in the mix. The Browns have already added one running back this offseason, and now they've added another. D'Onta Foreman has signed with the Browns. And D'Onta Foreman is coming off, and he's been a pretty good back. I mean, he's about to turn 28, so it'll be his age 28 season. Last year was a weird season for him. He signed as a free agent with the Bears. He was mostly a healthy scratch early, then played fairly well a little bit in the middle of the season. Then was a healthy scratch late in the year. The year before in Carolina, he had his most productive season and his most carries. He had 203 carries for the Panthers in 2022 and just shy of 1,000 yards, 914, a career high 5 rushing touchdowns, and it was a really good year. Overall for his career, he's averaged over 4 yards per carry, 4.2, including a career high best 4.5 in 2022. And last year was a career low in 2023, averaging 3.9 yards per carry, but he is in the mold of a Nick Chubb type of back. Not anywhere near as good, of course, but he's that type of back. He's not going to catch the passes. He's going to run the ball. He's a big guy. He's listed at 6 foot 235, and it's pretty huge. He's tough to tackle. So he's a cheaper version, I guess, of Nick Chubb. So we see that the Browns have now signed D'Onta Foreman. And you see that the Browns have signed Nyheim Hines. Now, I haven't seen the money yet actually, I haven't seen the money really on either guy. The Foreman news just came out today, and the Browns haven't even made it official. But they're both guys that you'd think would be on the roster. Obviously, you have Jerome Ford here, who turned out to be the starting back for most of the season last year, and he was underwhelming, but not bad. So that's 3 legitimate running backs. Plus, you still have Pierre Strong. Now, he's, at this point, unlikely to make the roster. And then, of course, Nick Chubb. Now, I think we've all kind of been assuming, and maybe I shouldn't speak for everybody, I think I've been assuming that Nick Chubb would be ready to play in week 1. Certainly not necessarily his full complement of carries in week 1. But I assumed he would be ready to go. Now, I'm not saying now he definitely won't be, because we have not heard from the Browns on this. Frankly, we haven't heard from the Browns on anything when it comes to Nick Chubb. He is under contract. We assumed that the Browns would not stick with Nick Chubb at the current dollar value of his contract and that it would be renegotiated, but there's been no talk of that. Doesn't mean it's not happening behind the scenes. But at this point, there's been no change to Nick Chubb's contract. But when you already had Jerome Ford and you signed D'Onta Foreman and you signed Nyheim Hines, most teams don't carry 4 running backs on the roster. Now, listen, Nyheim Hines especially could be a guy that the Browns might just cut or try to put on the practice squad and maybe nobody claims him. I mean, it's not like we're talking about a high-value player. He's a nice player, and he has a skill set where he's able to return. The Browns also re-signed James Prochet yesterday, so maybe they're competing. Maybe one's going to do kick returns, one's going to do punt returns. Who knows? But Nyheim Hines, before missing last season, had also been a very good pass-catching back. I would say he's probably the best one they have on their roster. So I think he's a fit for this team. When you sign D'Onta Foreman, to me, that's a signal that they're at least concerned that Nick Chubb won't be ready to go to start the season. Now, if I really wanted to dive into it, I could maybe turn this into a conspiracy theory that the Browns are going to cut Nick Chubb, but I can't even fathom that, so I'm not going to go down that road. But and to me, that wouldn't make any sense at all. But I think it does make sense that D'Onta Foreman especially is an insurance policy for Nick Chubb not being ready to start the season, because he would play that role as the first down, second down back on the. Now, you could say I'm wrong. Maybe Jerome Ford's going to play that role. But he's not a big bruising back like Nick Chubb. He wasn't great last year. He's ideally your change of pace back, maybe your third down back. Now, I've talked about Nyheim Hines having that role too. Jerome Ford is more, finesse back, whereas Nick Chubb and D'Onta Foreman are more power backs. So when I saw that signing today, it made me think that, maybe Nick Chubb's not going to be ready. Or at the very least, there's a chance he won't be ready, and they want to have an insurance policy. When we see what the Browns have done this offseason, they've added some incredible depth at a lot of positions. Right now, the Browns have four quarterbacks that should be on NFL rosters at a position where you normally keep 2. They have 5 running backs. You know what? I think Pierre Strong should be on an NFL roster. They have 5 running backs on an NFL roster that normally you keep 3, maybe 4. Defensive line. They have 8 guys already, and they're still looking at guys. And that doesn't include Sione Ika, who, we don't know that he's an NFL player, but he was drafted high, and he's going to be here, so that would put you at 9 already. So the Browns, my man G. Bush talks about Operation Stockpile. Well, the Browns have taken him to heart at certain positions. There's a number of positions. And that happened again today at running back. So while I'm not going to panic, and I think it's a good insurance policy, it does make me a little more concerned that Nick Chubb won't be ready. And maybe I should have assumed that after all. I mean, he had a devastating injury. He had to have 2 different ligaments in his knee repaired. And for him to be ready for the start of the season, that means he'd be ready in less than a year. Not that much less than a year, but a little. There was question about Mike Williams. Was he going to be back in time coming off a torn ACL? And he's a wide receiver, and he says he's going to be ready for the start of the season. I heard that in his Jets press conference today. But he only had 1 ligament tear, and there was question about it. Nick Chubb has 2. So there's a chance he's not going to be ready to start the season. If that's the tricky thing, though, is if he's not, well, they could put him on the PUP list, I guess. But if they put him on the PUP list, I think that's 6 weeks that he can't play. So it'll be something to keep an eye on. At the very least, this is protection if he's not ready. And it gives them tremendous depth because D'Onta Foreman, Nyheim Hines, and Jerome Ford, while none of them are anywhere close to Nick Chubb, they're all capable backs. They're all usable backs. All of them. In different ways. So I like the move, adding D'Onta Foreman. I think it was a smart play. Although, as I said, it makes me a little nervous about the prognosis of Nick Chubb, at least in the beginning of the season. I mentioned the James Prochet adding. They brought him back. He did returns last year. Maybe he's going to do the punt returns and Nyheim Hines the kick returns, assuming he makes the team. One other thing, I talked about this, obviously, when the Browns traded for Jerry Jeudy and on UCSS, and I commented on it. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. I didn't love the Jerry Jeudy extension. I would have let him play it out and dealt with it next year. The Browns are taking a gamble that they think he's going to be good and that the contract will work in their favor by signing him now as opposed to him having a breakout season this past year. Hopefully it'll work. My first reaction on Twitter was I wasn't thinking about that they were maybe adding that report was including the 5th-year extension. If it does include a 5th-year extension, I still don't love it, but it's okay. If it does not include the 5th-year extension, those numbers, I don't like it at all. In the end, I like the player, and I don't have to pay the money, so it's not that big a deal. But if it doesn't include the 5th-year extension, that money about $41 million guaranteed, that's a lot for a guy who hasn't proven much in the NFL. He's been just an okay, pretty, a decent player. But that's a lot of money. So I didn't love it. But I guess we'll see how it works itself out as time goes. And that's what the GM's got to project, right? He paid David Njoku before he proved anything. It's worked out very well. They paid Jack Conklin. Looks like a terrible deal. We'll see how this one works out for the Browns and works out for Jerry Jeudy. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to switch gears. The Guardians are 1 week and 1 day away from starting the 2024 Major League season. Their lineup is awful. Their pitching is good. Will it be enough to overcome that awful lineup? We'll talk about that and more with Jim Duquette of MLB Radio and former GM. He joins me next, right here in the bullpen with Adam the Bull, brought to you by Bet Rivers. All right, welcome back. It's the bullpen with Adam the Bull, and joining us now, former big league GM and now the co-host of Power Alley on MLB Radio. I shouldn't say now. You guys have been doing it a long time with Mike Farron, my favorite show on MLB Radio, and I'm not just saying that. Jim Duquette is with me. Jim, how are you? Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Good to see you. And I know you listen a lot, so we appreciate that and paying Farron's tab there because it's hard to get into his pocket.
Yeah, he mentioned me without mentioning me once on the show a couple of weeks ago because you guys were talking like fantasy baseball, and I had texted him that I've been doing a league that I started in 1991, which is kind of insane.
That is insane.
And when I first started playing fantasy baseball, I was doing stats by hand. I would get like the sporting news and I'd write in the stats, and then eventually it was like Baseball Weekly, or I think that's what it was called, that magazine. But we've come a long way from that, Jim.
We sure have. I'll tell you, the first time I really started looking into it, what fantasy was after I left the Orioles. So it was probably 2007 or 8. You were 16, 17 years ahead of me.
Yeah, it was crazy. Well, I've been a baseball nerd my whole life. I mean, I loved it. What's funny is I grew up in New York, but I was a Cubs fan, and I could never watch the Cubs because even though GN was on in a lot of places in Brooklyn where I grew up, I didn't have cable till I was in my 20s.
Right.
And but when I was about 11 or 12, my next door neighbor and my good friend, he bought one of those giant old school satellite dishes. And he'd get WGN, and we sometimes I'd talk him into, but not that the Cubs were worth watching in the 70s and the early 80s until 84, but still. But Jim, let's get into the Guardians because my fans are certainly interested in that, and it's disappointing. We've always known that the Guardians don't spend a lot of money, but since COVID, whatever excuse they've come up with, one of the members of the Dolan family just lost the Senate campaign here yesterday, that they could have spent that $17 million on an outfielder. What was weird about this offseason in particular, is that they trade for Scott Barlow and they pay him, I think, $7 million. They didn't non-tender Laureano, which is something I thought they would do. And even though I get why they love Hedges as a backup catcher, he can't hit. He's like the worst hitter in baseball. Well, either him or Miles Straw, who's also on this team. Right. And they're paying him $4 million. So they spent no money for a lineup that was probably the worst in baseball, certainly the worst power lineup. And so it's left fans frustrated and to some degree apathetic. What would you say to those fans right now?
Well, I understand their pain because I've kind of been scratching my head here over the last 2 seasons. I thought when they added the infusion of a new owner and it's going to phase him in, that was going to solve their cash flow issues. I thought that was going to be, not that they were going to go to middle of the pack with their payroll, but at least spend and build on a prior season, 20, 25, 30 million, whatever it might be, and they 2 seasons ago, they had a heck of a run and you felt really good about it. The complete image has changed on this club because they had one of the youngest teams in Major League Baseball. They surprised a lot of teams. They had a lot of young talent coming up into the ranks. And a couple things happened. Obviously, the pitching was a problem. Their offensive players didn't produce or progress as much as they had hoped. They made two bad trades. Nolan Jones and Will Benson are guys that would really look good in Guardians uniforms right now in cheap, and so all of those things have kind of, they haven't over their span, the front office, made a ton of mistakes. And in fact, they've been ahead of the curve on some of these deals. But those are a couple ones that you're like, what the heck is going on here?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think overall in their tenure, this front office, considering the constraints they have on them, have done a great job. But in the last year or two, they've got to get some blame. I mean, those moves, the Josh Bell thing was a disaster last year. The Mike Zunino thing was a disaster last year. And then I look at some, like even these cheap outfielders that have signed more recently, like an Adam Duvall. I'd love to have him play in center field for the Guardians right now. Instead, you go on Miles Straw. You sent Chase DeLauder to the minors. I get it. He hasn't played really above A ball. Estevan Florial was a prospect. I don't know what he is. He hasn't hit in spring training. I don't want to overblow that, but he's certainly not a sure thing. And I don't know if you know this stat, Jim, but the Guardians have not had an outfielder hit 20 home runs. I'm not saying 30, not 40, since Michael Brantley, I want to say 12 years ago. I mean, that 20 home runs, that's not a high bar. It's crazy.
We talk about that in our show a lot whenever we talk about the Guardians outfield because they have not, the lack of productivity. It's been really rough. And to your point on Laureano is one of the few teammates of Stephen Vogt's. So if you're going to say there's an inside track there, he's going to be there. He's got the makeup. He plays hard. He's got the defense. So. But to your point, like it didn't take a lot of money to have a guy like Duvall on the roster,
right?
And in Atlanta, certainly, they're talking about him platooning, but the way Jared Kelenic down there swinging the bat, Duvall may end up being the everyday guy by the middle of April. Like it may happen fast down there. So why wouldn't it be a good fit for the Guardians? And are they really not capable of adding a $3 million or $3.5 million salary to their payroll? It doesn't add up to me. Something's really been amiss here. And being in their camp, there's always a good vibe there. And Stephen Vogt taking over. I love the guy. He's been friends of mine and friends of my co-host for a long time. But there's some uphill sledding that has to take place with him in this role, replacing Terry. With all the expectations that are there and all the things that you have to do as a first-time manager, and it's not an overly talented roster right now, in my opinion.
No, you're right. And the only hope for the Guardians is that there's a ton of talent in their rotation, which is the one spot, and even the bullpen's pretty good. Yeah. And that the division overall, at least I don't think, is that great. The Twins seem like on paper they've taken a step back. I know the Tigers and Royals are on the come, but the White Sox stink. And but the pitching, right? That's it. I mean, if they're going to be in the mix, their starting rotation's got to be healthy and great. Gavin Williams is going to start the season on IR, but Bieber's look great in camp so far, and obviously Bybee was sensational last year. Can that pitching help them overcome this terrible offense?
I think it can. And I think that's the one thing, there's a silver lining in this. I think their defense is really good. And I think their pitching is really good. And a lot of times the metrics, I've talked a lot about this spring. I've talked to a lot of executives, and they agree and have been saying something similar. Metrics and the projections don't pick up the defense and how the quality of the defense as well as maybe other sports. It just hasn't reached that point where like the other statistics. So, when you see some of these projections, front office people think that there's more to the team and the quality of their team than what the projections will sometimes show if you have a good defensive team. And interestingly, I think the Guardians have one of the top rated defensive teams in the projections, but I still think that there's some wins there that you may not be seeing there overall. So pitching for sure, I think I like obviously Bybee. Again, this is going to all depend on health.
Yeah.
McKenzie, we know had his health issues. We know Bieber. Uh, it was the best. I talked to him when we were there a week ago. It is the best in terms of frame of mind that he's been in a couple of years. The stuff looks like it's back now. Can he maintain it? And everything else, we'll have to wait and see. But he went to Driveline, one of those high end pitching labs that revamped his whole delivery. He's much more efficient now. So I'm real hopeful there. The thing that I'm guarded about is they'll probably trade him at the deadline, like they do. All their starting pitchers are going to be free agent, but they've done pretty well in that area too.
Yeah.
It's just subtracting from what I think is going to be a strength that comes with some risk.
Speaking of trading pitchers, last year they traded Aaron Savali. Fans were angry about it. Now I think fans are happy because Kyle Manzardo looks like he's going to be a good player, but he's got to prove it. This is 100% about manipulating service time, or is there something legit to putting him in the minors?
Well, I was a little surprised at Manzardo there, because Naylor is healthy and he's probably going to play first. They'll DH Florial. My guess on this is, listen, Florial's track record hasn't been great. I'm skeptical that all the great praise that they were throwing on him is going to end up coming to being a productive major league player. The problem is he's out of options. I think it's more related to Florial than it is service time manipulation, because a lot of that has gone by the wayside with the incentives that, if let's say Manzardo comes up in June and he goes off and is a top 1 or 2 in rookie of the year,
right,
he's going to get a full year of service time anyway. So, and they would get, because of that, they would get a draft pick. So it's like, you want to make sure you use that window and, give that to your advantage. So that's the one rule that I like, that we aren't seeing as much service time manipulation.
Speaking of young players, the Guardians have had a number of guys in the shortstop mix for a while. And, Gabriel Arias had a chance to grab the job last year. He didn't do it. He's still obviously in the mix. They love Rocchio a lot. Who do you think ultimately becomes their best option at shortstop?
Well, they've been talking about Arias, and it seems like he's the guy, Rocchio. But he's, it's funny. He reminds me of a little bit is Alex Cora. Honestly, when you watched Alex Cora play, I think he might even be a little better as a hitter. Alex was more of a utility type player, but when I watched their game in spring, I saw 2 of their games, and I was watching from the vantage point of behind. It's against the Cubs, and I'm like, man, that looks like Alex Cora when Alex Cora was playing at the major league level. So but I think he's more athletic, and so there's some things that I like about him. So I would give the Arias the kind of inside track, but keep an eye on Rocchio at some point there at short. And it is an area this year that I am concerned about with them in terms of finding some more offensive productivity.
You think Bo Naylor? he had a great end to the season last year. Are you expecting a big season out of him?
I'm bullish on him. Yeah. I think it's when you talk to Josh, Josh gave us some really good insight. The competitiveness between the family is always fun. Those conversations, they compete over everything. He's like, we even compete over who eats the fastest. Like they they're going over all those. So that makeup wise is there, but with them working out together, that I think with Josh kind of leading the way there, I think Bo. I'm optimistic about the type of season he's going to have, and you see that a lot with guys. Prior year they get their on the job experience, and then the next year is kind of their breakout year. So I think this will be that year for him, for Bo.
Any concern? Jose Ramirez had a little bit of a down year last year.
Yeah.
Should we be concerned that he's starting on the decline, or you think it was just a blip?
The hard part with me and him is if you look at his numbers, each of the last 3 seasons, his OPS has gone down bit. A bit.
That's true.
It's been still at a high level. Last year, I don't know, it was over 800 still, but I think it has a lot to do with the fact that he hasn't had much protection there. In protection meaning before and after him. So if Jimenez right now, I think Jose is going to hit third. Right, Jimenez is going to hit second. he needs to have a better season. I think he will.
Yeah.
Josh Naylor sounds healthy. I think so. If Jose is squeezed between the two of them, I think he's going to see more pitches. He won't try to maybe do as much as he was trying to do last year, which was do everything. And I think because of that, I think you'll see a better season there. I think that middle of the lineup is critical for their success this year.
Doubt.
I really do.
Jim, last thing on the Guardians here. Manuel Clase, obviously 2 years ago, was lights out. Last year he had a ton of saves, but he also had a lot of blown saves.
Yeah.
He's had a rough week here. He's given up a bunch of home runs. He gave up a lot of home runs last year. What are you seeing there? Like, and how concerned should we be about him?
I'll tell you what was a little bit concerning for me. Like you said, he blew a lot of saves last year. Stuff seemed like it was still there, but with the fact that he is on such a big team-friendly deal, and you heard his name rumored out there as a potential trade candidate, told me that they're, I think, concerned. The Guardians front office is concerned, and so I don't know if there's something in the delivery or not. His stuff still looks fine to me. And maybe it's just a blip right now because this in Arizona, the ball jumps out of there. It's so ridiculous. You can't even count on evaluations. I think that's part of the why Mazzardo didn't make it. Mazzardo Mazzardo was 385, 470, something like that, and he didn't make the team. I think there's some things there that I would say. Let's see how Clase gets off to a start.
All right, if you could settle this debate, a friend of mine and I were having.
Sure.
The A's, the Rockies, and the who's the third team?
The White Sox.
Well, they stink.
3 worst teams I've seen.
Yeah. Like we were debating who's got the worst roster: the A's, the Rockies. Now it wasn't the White Sox. Now all of a sudden I'm drawing a blank on who the third team is. But who do you think actually has the worst roster of them all?
Oh man, well, it's tough. I'm trying to think if the Angels were in that mix, but they don't have a bad roster. They're just young. They don't have a lot of depth. But White Sox, for me, because after trading Dylan Cease, they have a couple position players. They don't have a lot of well-known pitchers. Yep. I'm concerned about that team. I think the Rockies are really going to struggle. I would put the two of those teams. Oakland, they
Nats.
have some young talent. Oh, the Nats. I like the Nats.
Yep.
The Nats are going to be a little better than people think.
All right.
So I'm going to go Rockies and who is the other one?
A's?
Not Oakland. Oakland.
White Sox.
White Sox.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to do. Rockies and the White Sox, and then Oakland and Washington would be that next crew.
The last thing, Jim, the fans here know I'm a big Cubs fan, which was certainly awkward in 2016. And I like the Council's going after Council. I was expecting them to spend a little more money this offseason. I like the team, don't love the team, but the division feels very wide open. After being in Cubs camp recently, how do you think they stack up in the NL Central?
So I think it is wide open, that division. I mean, for the two teams, some people might argue the Cardinals too. I don't know if I'm feeling that. I wish I had a chance to get in their camp, but I feel like it's Reds or Cubs, and I actually liked the vibe in Cubs camp. That Craig Counsell had brought. It was just after Bellinger had signed. He'd been there for a couple days. I think Swanson's going to have a better offensive season. I don't know if Bellinger will be the same. I think Morel is the third first combination of Morel and Bush. How do they handle their respective roles? Can Morel play defense because the offense is there? Can Bush's offense be enough because he'll be fine defensively? Those are outside of that. Imanaga they love. I think you're going to see a lot of home runs given up because he loves to pitch up in the zone. But hopefully there's solo shots. And if that happens, I think their offense is better than last year, and the pitching is about the same. And so I think they have a pretty good chance. And they got Counsell now. So I think they're I think they're a wild card team minimum.
Awesome. Jim, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
All right. You got it, Adam. Good to see you.
All right, great talking with Jim Duquette, even though it's not great news on the Guardians. But listen, with the pitching staff, they got a shot still in that division. We'll talk more about the Guardians next week, both here on the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show and the new Ultimate Cleveland Guardians show, which will debut next week as well. So good stuff as always. Thanks to Brian Monzo for producing. We'll talk to you next time. Where else but right here in the bullpen with Adam the Bull, brought to you by Bet Rivers. See ya.